Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds.
Recently, I asked Mint Mobile's legal team if big wireless companies are allowed to raise prices due to inflation. They said yes. And then when I asked if raising prices technically violates those onerous two-year contracts, they said, "What the f*** are you talking about, you insane Hollywood ass?" So to recap, we're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month.
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
Boston police officer John O'Keefe was found face up in the snow
outside a home occupied by people known to O'Keefe.
Prosecutors accuse O'Keefe's girlfriend, Karen Reed, of backing into him and leaving him to die in the snow.
Lawyers for the woman not only say their client is innocent, but they're alleging a cover-up.
There are a lot of issues in this case. We're looking at arm injuries with scratches. We're not looking at tire tracks.
The FBI is investigating an investigation that never happens.
People in this town are scared of the people who are supposed to protect and serve.
The trial of Karen Reed is underway.
There are more people here at the beginning of this than at the beginning of Johnny Depp's trial.
Jurors are coming and going with a police escort.
I've never seen anything like this.
It's a spectacle, that's for sure.
This is not a Hollywood star. This is an accused murderer getting a standing ovation as she enters the courtroom. What is going on out there?
If you thought things in the Karen Reed trial were going to calm down as we approach the new trial, boy, were you wrong. We are still on track to begin the new trial April 1st, and judging by how things are going so far, it looks like this is going to be one of the most intense trials that we've seen in recent history. A lot has happened lately, so we have a lot to cover, so let's jump in. First, let's start out with a quick update on Michael Proctor. Now, there's not a ton to report just yet. Proctor, of course, was the lead investigator in the case against Karen Reed. He was suspended without pay last July after Karen Reed's first trial ended in a hung jury. Proctor had to go before a trial judge to face the allegations against him of misconduct in the performance of his duties as a uniformed member of the Mass State Police. Now, the hearing could result in Proctor being officially let go from MSP, but there are no decisions yet. The first day of the trial board hearing was January 15th, but it was not open to the public or the media. The second day of the hearing is scheduled for February 10th at the General Headquarters, so I'll give updates when they become available. Next, an update on Dr. Russell. In episode 36, I went over in detail the motion to exclude the testimony of Dr. Russell, the defense's opposition to the motion, and the Daubert hearing that was conducted over the course of 2 full days in court. Basically, Special Prosecutor Brennan wanted to prevent Dr. Russell from being able to testify that she believes that the injuries on John O'Keefe's arm came from a dog. The defense, obviously, opposed that. In a decision that was issued on January 13th, Judge Beverly Cannoni denied the Commonwealth's motion, which means that Dr. Russell will again be able to testify. After 2 Daubert hearings and testimony from the first trial, this will make Dr. Russell's 4th time having to go through her very long list of credentials and experience so that she can render her opinion. Judge Cannoni's ruling didn't come without a bit of snark, though. In the first paragraph, she says, quote, "Although a close question, the court will deny the Commonwealth's motion." A close question? Really? Judge Cannoni says that the recognition of dog bite wounds is not within the common knowledge of a layperson, and it requires expert testimony, and Dr. Russell is a qualified expert as to these topics. She also notes that Dr. Russell's testimony satisfied all 5 foundational elements required to allow in an expert's opinions. Cannoni acknowledges Brennan's arguments that Dr. Russell's expertise primarily concerns the treatment, not identification of dog bites. Her evaluation did not consider all available information, and she has not compared the abrasions with the dentition of the specific German Shepherd in question, and her opinion is inconsistent with the findings that there was no canine DNA in the area of the victim's clothing near the abrasions. But she says that goes to the weight of the testimony as opposed to the admissibility. Now, maybe I've been doing this a little bit too long now, but the way that was all worded kind of frustrated me. The treatment versus identification thing, okay, fine. But not considering all available information, That's the stuff that she said that even when she did consider it afterwards, it didn't change her opinion. So to me, it's kind of irrelevant. And then comparing the abrasions to the dentition of Chloe is junk science. So it's also irrelevant because she's not testifying which dog caused the marks. She's only testifying that a dog did it. And the statement that there was no canine DNA in the area of the victim's clothing near the abrasions is also not really credible in this case because the clothing wasn't tested. One swab was used for the entire thing, and it isn't documented as to exactly where it was swabbed. And proper protocol wasn't followed. And there were inhibitors that can prevent it from showing up that showed up in that swab. Now, I'm not saying that I think that the marks are 100% dog marks, but the arguments as to why they aren't are really misleading. But that's going to be the stuff for the defense attorneys to address at trial. Okay, so next up is a big one that has multiple parts to it. So here's the background of this. A critical part of Karen Reed's defense is that something shady must have happened in the Sallyport at Canton Police Department when her car was taken there. Nobody is denying that Karen's taillight was cracked when it arrived at CPD. Now, whether it was cracked from backing into John's car as she was leaving that morning, or from a cocktail glass being thrown at it, or a pedestrian strike, whatever it was, something cracked her taillight. Now, the theory is that someone at Canton Police Department broke Karen's taillight that was already cracked and took those pieces of taillight to 34 Fairview for them to be quote-unquote discovered during a search. Now, there are various thoughts on why this would have happened. Some people believe that Karen was being framed for what happened to John. Some people think that it was a way to pile on some evidence to help secure an easy conviction. Like, hey, we already think she's guilty. Let's just make sure she goes down for this. But whatever the reason, the defense's theory relies heavily on what happened to Karen's car at that Sallyport. So far, the evidence that has been presented doesn't really debunk either theory either way. There's ring camera footage of Karen leaving John's and dash cam footage from a wellness check that was done. And both of those show the cracked taillight, but between snow piled on the car in one video and snow falling and it being dark in the other, it's not clear how bad the crack is. In the photos that were taken much later at the Sallyport, the taillight looks almost completely busted out. It's missing huge red pieces. So there's a lot of debate over how bad the crack was when the car actually got to CPD. Now, there are other parts of this whole situation that look really suspicious. Things that actually support the defense's theory. For example, the first search that was done at Fairview Road uncovered clear pieces of cocktail glass, but somehow didn't uncover very large pieces of red plastic taillight. Also, Proctor put in his reports that he didn't have Karen's car towed until 5:30, but her parents have ring cams and it showed that they actually towed her car at 4:15. That discrepancy has been blamed on daylight savings time and Scrivener's errors. But the daylight savings time thing was debunked, and a Scrivener's error doesn't make a whole lot of sense since he wrote it 3 different times on the report. But that would be up to each juror to decide what they think sounds credible. So let's just say that the defense is right and Proctor or whoever else from Mass State Police decided to stack or plant evidence for whatever reason by putting taillight pieces in the yard. Is that theory even possible? Yes, and here's how. Karen's car was towed at 4:15 and arrived at Canton Police Department at 5:30. The first piece of taillight is found at Fairview 15 minutes later. Canton PD is about 1.3 miles from Fairview Road, so maybe a 5-minute drive. But how would it have got there? Well, remember Lieutenant Tully? Tully has actually now been rehomed and rotated out of Norfolk County, but you'll remember from previous episodes, he's done a lot of questionable things when it comes to this case and the case against Aiden Carney. Tully testified during trial about that first piece of taillight that was found. A picture was shown, and the piece is just kind of sitting on top of a huge pile of snow. Tully says that it was dug up, but then it was placed there on top of the snow just to take the picture, to memorialize where it was found.
The items that you're photographing, were they moved in any way prior to you memorializing them with photographs?
Yes, this piece in particular, the CERT team member as he was removing the snow with the shovel, had picked up this piece of plastic with it. I asked him to place it back where he found it, where it approximately was, so that I could memorialize it in place.
So it was picked up and you asked him to put it back where he found it, and he did so?
Yes.
Also testified that he left his house in the snow to go handle this search at Fairview Road. But before he went to Fairview Road, first he went to Canton PD.
I first went to the Canton Police Department to talk to Chief Berkowitz and wait for the arrival of the CERT team, and then to 34 Fairview.
So, Tully goes to Canton PD to talk to Chief Berkowitz and wait on CERT team to arrive so that they can go search the yard at Fairview Road. Now, Karen's car shows up to Canton PD, where Tully is, presumably with CERT team members also, at 5:30, right around the same time that Tully is leaving there to go to Fairview Road. Then, 15 minutes later, a red piece of taillight that was missed in the first search is suddenly found, and the picture to prove this shows the piece just kind of sitting on top of a pile of snow where it was placed to take a picture. So, the defense theory is possible, and given everything else in this case, it's actually reasonable, as in reasonable doubt. So now the Sallyport video becomes very important. All they need is the Sallyport video to show the condition that Karen's car arrived in. It'll hopefully show what was happening around the car while it was there, and they can prove or disprove the defense's theory with that. And it should be that easy, but nothing is that easy in Canton. The Canton PD cameras and video have been a huge problem since day one. The Commonwealth has provided the defense with video from the Canton PD 3 different times. On April 4th, right before the trial is set to start, the Commonwealth produces footage for the first time from the Canton PD main driveway and the Sallyport front wall. Now, this would be great, except it's missing 42 minutes, including the crucial minutes when Karen's car arrived. That critical video that could have either proven or debunked the theories of either side. Just missing. Then, mid-trial, there's more Sallyport video that shows up, this time from the back wall. It's brought into evidence while Buchanan is on the stand, and he says it's a clear and accurate depiction, then says that, as you can see in the video, nobody approaches the right rear taillight. The problem here, of course, is that the video was inverted. It was all backwards, and he never said that, and neither did Lally. So we're all looking at this like, yep, we can see right rear taillight and nobody is near it. But the right rear taillight was actually on the opposite side, the side that we couldn't see, and there was someone standing right beside it. Then, after the trial in October, the Commonwealth produces new video surveillance, this time from the Canton PD side exterior, the first floor corridor, the rear parking lot on the main side, and the rear parking lot cruiser side angles. Now, where was all of this the first time? The new footage shows Higgins arriving in the parking lot of Canton PD at 1:26 a.m. He enters the police department and is seen talking to an unidentified individual on the phone as he's leaving Canton PD at 1:34 a.m. Okay, so Higgins going to Canton PD in the snow at 1:30 a.m. after being out drinking was already kind of weird, but okay. But then to see that he's on the phone with someone at that time, which is right after John's death, that's the kind of stuff that the defense is specifically talking about. And it's never mentioned. And that relevant evidence is withheld from the defense during the first trial. That's a big deal. He has a lot of questions swirling around him. Why is it that nobody can say for sure where he parked? Different people have different, very specific memories of where his Jeep was. Those places make a lot of sense when you factor in the testimony of any of the people who came to pick up Julie Nagel, who said that there wasn't a Jeep there. Then there's the issue of it being in front of the mailbox when Karen supposedly drove 62 feet in reverse. That doesn't work either. But aside from where he parked being an issue, there are those romantic, if you can even call it that, texts between Higgins and Karen Reed when she and John were off and on. And she thought that John cheated on her, so she starts texting Higgins and they have this whole text fling. Now, Higgins is asking about what Karen wants from him, and he sounds like he wants her to give him some kind of answer about where this thing between them may be able to go. But when she and John patch things up, she kind of ghosts him. And the first time they saw each other or spoke again was that night. Then there's the question about what was being said in the surveillance video at Waterfall when it looked like Higgins was pointing at John. Then there's the whole issue with Higgins saying that he had the plow on his Jeep, and when he got ready to leave, it scraped on something, so he had to lift it higher. Then there's the butt dials. Then he destroyed his phone and his SIM card. And look, none of these things by themselves mean that Higgins is responsible for John's death. But when there are a lot of things that don't seem to make much sense, every avenue is worth checking out. And this one wasn't checked out at all. If this evidence had been actually turned over like it should have been, they could have used that to get the phone records and maybe seen what happened before he destroyed it. This is no longer an invasion of privacy or a fishing expedition. The defense has argued that Higgins immediately began working to cover up something that happened to John O'Keefe. And here he is on the phone around that time. So now it's no longer a fishing expedition. There's a justifiable reason to check his records and see who he was talking to. If nothing else, to rule him out. But they didn't go through that with anyone. They focused on Karen and Karen alone. But also, this could be considered a huge discovery violation. All evidence must be turned over to the defense, and this wasn't. We'll be right back after this. Are you ready to optimize your nutrition this year? Factor has chef-made gourmet meals that make eating well easy. They're dietitian approved and they're ready to heat and eat in just 2 minutes. So you can fuel right and feel great no matter what life throws at you. Factor arrives fresh and fully prepared, so it's perfect for any active, busy lifestyle. And you can lose up to 8 pounds in 8 weeks with the Factor Keto Meals. It's based on randomized, controlled clinical trial with Factor Keto, and results will vary depending on diet and exercise. And with 40 options across 8 dietary preferences on the menu each week, it's easy to pick meals that are tailored to your goals. The shredded chicken taco bowl is my absolute favorite. It comes with roasted corn salsa and cilantro lime sour cream. And with my busy schedule, it's ready in 2 minutes. And because it's never frozen, it tastes so fresh. Eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/juror50off and use code juror50off to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's code juror50off at factormeals.com/juror50off to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. So there's all these random clips coming at different times in different formats, and some is missing chunks of crucial time, some is inverted, and on some the timestamps change color. Some of it's so dark that you can't see anything. It's just issue after issue. Plus, the defense says that the Commonwealth has been unable to establish any kind of chain of custody for the various clips of video. So overall, there are a lot of issues with the accuracy and the forensic reliability. Now, the defense decides it's best to have an expert just go to Canton PD and perform an independent analysis of their DVR system and any video footage that it contained from January 29th of 2022. The defense contacts Special Prosecutor Hank Brennan and makes this request. Now, according to the defense's filing, they requested access to the Canton PD DVR system and the drives that hold recordings from the security camera so that the defense's expert, Mr. Erickson, could obtain video files in their native file format with all available metadata from the day that Karen's car was brought in. Now, in order to ensure the accuracy and a complete download of all available data and metadata, the defense requested that their expert be allowed to make a mirror image of the DVR system's drive. So Brennan agreed to allow the defense access and to make the arrangements necessary for Mr. Erickson to extract the video from the DVR system. So Erickson flies from Phoenix to Massachusetts on December 11th and shows up the next morning at Canton PD. He was met by Colleen Crawford, a video tech from the DA's office, and 3 other people. So according to the defense, Ms. Crawford is surprised to see the expert and basically says that she doubts that the footage will still exist. Erickson asked if anyone had accessed the system to determine if the footage was even present, and they said no. But here's the thing. The defense attorneys say that they actually talked to Ms. Crawford before Erickson flew out there. She was made aware of the footage that the parties had agreed would be extracted, but now she's surprised and doubts it will be there. So Erickson accessed the system, and it turns out there's only 30 days of video history on there, so none of the relevant video had been preserved. Erickson tried to generate activity logs for the date of January 29th, and the request took a crazy amount of time with no results. So he asked if the system always took this long and was kind of told they didn't know. He kept trying for a while and then determined that the activity logs were also gone. They also told Erickson that they didn't have any kind of forensic extraction to get the original data that was done. And when they need to preserve something, they just save it manually. So Erickson asked for a copy of the original video files that they had pulled from the DVR system. But he says they refused to turn it over. They told him it had already been given to the defense counsel. When Erickson asked how it was given to them, they looked confused. So he tried to break it down. Was it a USB drive, a disk, or a share link? They didn't know, but eventually said that it was probably a share link. Now, apparently the Canton PD does not have a written protocol for how to extract video, and the way that they extracted it means that it isn't able to be authenticated. The data gets converted into a playable format, which means that the new file won't hash verify to the original. So there's no way to verify or test the authenticity and integrity of the video. The hash is like a fingerprint. It's unique for each piece of data. And when the DVR changes the format of these videos, that fingerprint isn't the same on the replica as it is on the original. That was kind of the whole point of the expert going to try to get the originals so that everything could be checked and verified. So the footage is all gone. There was no preservation of evidence, so it was overwritten. Now, there's also no log establishing who may have accessed, manipulated, copied, and or deleted any of the footage from that day either. The defense points out that this is especially concerning in this case, where there is substantial evidence suggesting that the videos have in fact been altered, despite claims to the contrary by the Commonwealth and its agents. So here's another issue that raises some big questions. When Erickson arrived at CPD to extract the video, the camera system was set to overwrite older video footage with new footage after 30 days. Okay, but all 3 times that the Commonwealth produced footage to the defense, it was way past that 30-day window. They literally just got video in October from almost 3 years before. So if someone has to save it manually in another format for it to be preserved, that means that they had this footage during the time when all discovery was due for the trial, and they didn't turn it over. The Commonwealth isn't allowed to not turn things over. That's part of the law. So the total cost to fly the expert out there and do all of this was more than $12,000. On January 22nd, the defense filed a motion to have the Commonwealth pay this expense. The argument is that the Commonwealth should bear the cost of having the expert travel out of state to CPD to copy files that they knew had already been deleted. They said to force Karen to pay the expenses out of pocket when she's already prejudiced by the loss of the evidence itself would be a complete miscarriage of justice, especially since the expert traveled to Massachusetts as part of an arrangement made between the defense and the Commonwealth, in which the Commonwealth represented that Erickson could visit and extract the relevant footage. Now, at the time the Commonwealth made that agreement, they knew or had reason to know through their agents who were responsible for properly preserving the footage that it wasn't preserved. The defense also says that based on the destruction of this and other exculpatory evidence, they plan on filing a motion to dismiss the case for extraordinary governmental misconduct. Not only because they didn't preserve the evidence, but because if the system is set to delete after 30 days, that means that all 3 times that they handed over footage to the defense, the Commonwealth had care, custody, or control of it and didn't turn it over to the defense in the time that they were supposed to. What else do they have? The Commonwealth filed a response asking the court to deny the defense's request to make them recover those expenses, and claiming that the defense is distorting the facts. So according to Brennan, he said the defense has never made a formal preservation request for evidence. Now, there actually was a formal preservation request made by David Yannetti on February 2nd of 2022, and Lally acknowledged it during Karen's arraignment, which was streamed on local news there. The preservation includes all notes and evidence from law enforcement, among other things. And while it doesn't specify Sallyport video specifically, it seems unrealistic to expect a broad preservation request to include every specific item, especially because you really don't even know what's there yet. Now, regardless, Brennan said that Jackson made the request to have the expert come and asked that the Commonwealth not access the system prior to the expert's examination of it. Brennan then worked that out with Chief Rafferty at Canton PD and also told the defense that they can tour Canton PD and make note of any other camera locations. The Commonwealth said that they would have a forensic examiner from the DA's office and a Mass State Trooper present as well, and would video record everything. But when he got there, the footage was gone. Brennan says that he told the defense that he would inquire about the chain of custody of the video footage and request any documentation that may exist about that, since it's such a big problem. Brennan said he met with retired Sergeant D. Giamitro, who was the officer who originally obtained and produced the video from the Canton Police Department. The sergeant told Brennan that he would routinely make a copy of footage obtained from the NVR and preserve it on the department's hard drive, which is separate from the NVR file system. So Brennan says that he offered to produce a copy of the stored footage from the hard drive or allow defense to access it. The defense requested more information about the hard drive storage, which Brennan says is coming. Now, I think this is all a huge problem on top of a ton of other huge problems. I agree with the defense's request to have the Commonwealth pay these expenses. This isn't the first time that Karen Reed has been forced out of money for things that were out of her control. Now, this happened during the last trial with multiple hearings and changing of plans last minute, and Karen had to take those losses financially. Judge Canoni has been making some fair rulings on the hearings leading up to this trial, so we can follow this one and see how she rules on this motion as well. I expect to hear more, especially about the withholding of evidence of the videos of Higgins. On January 31st, Karen and her attorneys were back in court in Dedham, Massachusetts for a motions hearing as we prepare for the next trial. Now, there were two main topics that were discussed. One is the argument about reporter Gretchen Voss's off-the-record notes, and the other is the Commonwealth's motion to keep digital expert Richard Green from testifying in the next trial. Now, more on that one in a minute, but first let's take a look at the arguments for Voss. Gretchen Voss wrote an article for Boston Magazine titled "The Karen Reed Case in Canton, The Killing That Tore a Town Apart." The article came out in September of 2023, and it featured information from a series of 3 interviews that Voss did with Karen. Now, last year, the Commonwealth filed a motion asking the court to turn over confidential interview notes to the government so that they could see what they could use in the notes against Karen during trial. Now, I went over this in more detail in a previous episode. Massachusetts is one of only 10 states in the country that doesn't have a shield law to protect journalists from having to turn over information either from or about their sources. Journalistic privilege may not exist in Massachusetts, but at the time that these arguments were being made last year, there was a bill that had just been introduced to Congress proposing press privilege on a federal level. So here's why privilege is important. Think about some of the main privileges that exist, like attorney-client privilege, doctor-patient, spousal, therapist-patient. These are all privileged because protecting what is said encourages open communication. Imagine if you're seeing a therapist and you're scared to say the things that you're really dealing with, or to talk about trauma that you experienced because it's not protected and your darkest moments can be shared with whoever they choose. If you don't feel protected, you don't openly and honestly communicate. So now take that and think about it from a journalistic standpoint. Look at Watergate, for example. An anonymous source reached out to a journalist with the Washington Post and exposed a massive campaign of political spying and sabotage. that was not only illegally funded by donor contributions, but also directed by President Nixon and White House officials. That was a huge scandal, and the anonymous source's identity was protected for 30 years until he finally decided to publicly admit who he was at age 91. Now, the source, his name was Mark Felt. He was the deputy director of the FBI, as in the second highest ranking possible in the FBI. So there's no way that he could have exposed what was going on if he had not been protected. Now, obviously, Gretchen Voss's notes on the interview with Karen Reed isn't at the same level of this huge history-making political scandal. But forcing a reporter to turn over notes and off-the-record interviews still threatens that same journalistic independence. Voss's attorney, Robert Birchie, argued that the public relies on the ability of reporters to learn information that enables it to hold powerful people and institutions accountable. And in order to do that, it's imperative that reporters are able to make and keep promises of confidentiality to their sources, whether that's the identity of their sources or statements made off the record. Now, Lally had argued that there was no journalistic privilege in Massachusetts, but the court sided with Voss and Boston Magazine, so she did not have to turn over her confidential interview notes and recordings. Now, here comes Brennan, and we are arguing everything all over again. Episode 35 has the breakdown of all of that. But basically, Boston Magazine had turned over some of the audio from the interviews, but it was redacted. Brennan argued that he wanted the whole thing and said that he believes that there are some admissions of guilt in there that he wanted access to. And while Judge Canoni decided that Voss didn't have to turn everything over the last time, this time she ruled in favor of the prosecution. In December, the judge granted Brennan's request for access to off-the-record interviews, notes, and documents that Voss had from her 3 interviews with Karen. Judge Canoni said that the redacted materials suggest that what Karen said to Boston Magazine may have been different in certain respects from the expected evidence at trial and from other accounts that she has given. And the redactions prevent the Commonwealth from fully understanding Karen's statements. So, in the hearing last week, Voss's attorney was back in court, asking the judge to reconsider that decision because it would impair Voss's ability to accurately report on the news. Now, the attorney argued that forcing Voss to turn over her notes is forcing her to either violate the court order or obey the court order and establish herself as a reporter who can't be trusted. Now, Judge Canoni has the notes and communications from Voss and has reviewed them in camera. The judge said that any notes about Voss's impressions or thoughts or anything like that don't have to be turned over to the Commonwealth. The order included the communication from Karen and things that she said directly. Those are the things that she said will have to be turned over. But after Birchie asked the judge to reconsider, Judge Canoni actually reversed her previous ruling. Her decision states that requiring the disclosure of the notes poses a greater risk to the free flow of information than the other materials produced. Another loss for the prosecution, but a win for free press. We'll be right back after this. So, let's move into the main topic that was covered in the hearing, the testimony of the defense's digital forensics expert, Richard Green. Now, I touched on this briefly in the last episode. Okay, full disclosure, we aren't very far into this with Hank Brennan as the new prosecutor, but based on what I've seen so far, I'm not a fan. Look, I promise to always give you the information straight from court documents and testimony like I always have. But being this deep into the case, I also have opinions, which I'm going to freely give as well. I've never once claimed to know what happened the night that John O'Keefe died, so I won't give opinions on that. All parties are innocent unless proven otherwise. I'm not here to solve this case. I'm here to analyze the evidence and the arguments and decide if I think that they have proven Karen Reed's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. But when it comes to Brennan and the Commonwealth and the law enforcement involved in this case, there's a lot happening, and I have some strong thoughts that I am not going to keep to myself. And some of my opinions you may agree with, some you may not. And it's always good to hear multiple sides, so I recommend listening to other perspectives that differ from mine as well. Kind of like a juror hearing from two different experts and deciding what they think. Which brings us right back to Brennan's motion about the defense expert that he titled Commonwealth's Motion to Exclude Defense Witness Richard Green's Debunked Opinions. The snark is real. So, first of all, I've talked about this on my podcast many times, experts giving their opinions and the interpretation of data. They say what they think based on their knowledge, experience, training, and education, and they explain why they think that. The jurors will often hear two different experts give two totally different opinions. That's not uncommon. People can interpret data differently. Doctors can have different medical opinions, and so on. But what's so interesting and frustrating about this case is that Brennan is now coming in and wanting to have 4 out of the 6 witnesses who testified for the defense excluded from testifying in the next trial. The defense called 1 civilian witness, Lucky the snowplow driver, and 5 experts. Of those 5 experts, the Commonwealth is potentially trying to keep 4 of them from testifying in the next trial. It didn't work with Dr. Russell, obviously, but what Brennan did with Dr. Russell is the same thing he's doing now with Richard Green. It seems to me like he isn't wanting the experts banned from testifying because of methodology or experience. He's wanting them banned from testifying because he doesn't want them to give their opinions to the jury, especially since their opinions go directly against what Brennan is going to try to convince the jury happened that night. Now, in the motion, Brennan says that Green's claim that Jen McCabe Googled how long to die in the cold at 2:27 and his claim that the search was deleted both lack any evidentiary support. He says that the claims are baseless, have no scientific, forensic, or factual support, and it would be misleading to the jury to let him testify. So, during the hearing, Hank Brennan argues this motion. He tells the judge that he wants to do another Daubert hearing, like the one that we just had to go through with Dr. Russell, and he wants Mr. Green to have to come in and testify to his opinions, and he says he wants to bring in one of his witnesses, either Ian Whiffen or Jessica Hyde, to testify as well. Basically, Brennan wants the judge to allow him to bring in his witness to tell the defense why their witness is wrong. That, my friends, is a difference of expert opinion, which is not a reason to have to force another waste of 2 full days in court for a Daubert hearing for an expert who was already qualified as an expert to give an opinion that was already qualified as an expert opinion. These are the things that the attorneys address on cross-examination. You don't get to just say, I don't want the jury to hear that, don't let them come. That's not how this works. Brennan is abusing the system here. He's trying to utilize Daubert to keep the jury from being presented with expert opinions that show reasonable doubt. And look, I can appreciate a good, healthy display of snark in attorneys, but the snark in these motions, and especially his argument, it's too much for me. So let's walk through some of his arguments and the way that he made them. We'll also look at Alessi's responses and previous testimony from the experts that he's referencing. So Brennan starts by arguing different points about the affidavits from Richard Green. There was one from the first trial, and now there's another one responding to this motion. Now, Brennan suggests that the defense attorneys wrote Green's affidavit, pointing out that Gray Key, a forensic tool to get access to data on mobile devices, is misspelled in the affidavit. Gray Key is spelled with an A, but in the affidavit, it's spelled with an E. Side note, I looked at the previous affidavit from Richard Green, and it was spelled with an E on that one as well. I don't think that the misspelling of one of the many forensic tools that's being used is a big gotcha moment, but most of the big gotcha moments that Brennan tries to make happen kind of seem to fall flat. Also, Brennan even misspelled his own name on one of his motions. And don't get me started on the whole bytes versus bits thing. Brennan goes on to say that he thinks that the tone of the affidavit is not the tone of an expert, but that of an advocate, again suggesting that this was written by defense. He even says that Green is just a vessel for the third-party culprit defense.
When we look at Mr. Green's affidavit, it is not that of a forensic examiner, it's that of an advocate for the defense. When we look at his affidavit, there is quite a bit of advocacy and insinuations and surmise and conjecture and claims that have no factual basis, but there is little on methodology.
Okay, so this is setting the tone for this entire argument back and forth. Now, Brennan spends a lot of time on a soapbox, both offended and appalled at different things throughout his argument. And he's all about the dramatics. But he also contradicts himself multiple times, gets a couple things wrong, and makes arguments that aren't really arguments and are once again just wasting everyone's time. Let's break this down. The whole reason that we are here is because Brennan wants the judge to have a Daubert hearing for the defense digital expert Richard Green. Now, Daubert hearings determine if a witness is allowed to testify, but that is determined based on qualifications and methodology, not based on opinions that you don't want the jury to hear. After Dr. Russell's Daubert hearing, I said I never wanted to hear the word methodology again, but yet here we are, back at it with another expert. But here's the problem with his argument. There is a methodology for this, and the methodology that Green used is the exact methodology that the Commonwealth's experts used. They just interpret the data differently. And that's for the experts battling it out at trial, not for Daubert hearings. The thing is, any experts on any side can be completely wrong in their opinions. But if they're qualified and use proper methodology, they can still give their opinions. I think about Dr. Dorothy Lewis in the trial of Letitia Stout. Now, she testified in trial that she believed that Letitia had dissociative identity disorder or multiple personalities. Now, I think that she was absolutely wrong, but I respect her as a very qualified doctor, and I appreciated hearing two sides before making my mind up about what I believed. Brennan repeats often that there's no methodology, and that's just simply not true. He also argues the point about using multiple tools for the data extractions, claiming that the defense using multiple tools is a substitute for methodology.
What the defense apparently is mistaken about is that using a number of tools does not substitute for methodology. You can use one tool, you can use 30 tools. They're all going to say on the timestamp that how long to die in the code occurred at 2:27 on that browser. That is the time that was opened. That window was opened at 2:27. But you can't just look at 8 different tools that are all going to say the timestamp is the same. You have to look into the data and into the databases, knowledge C, the history, and you have to determine what artifacts exist to show that occurred at that time. And when you do that in this process, it is clear that 2:27 search happened after 6 a.m. in the morning. And so that's what Mr. Green doesn't do. He doesn't engage in methodology at all. And if he doesn't do that, we'll do that for him.
Brennan says that using tools doesn't substitute for methodology, but using different tools is a part of the methodology, according to the Commonwealth's own witness, Jessica Hyde.
That's very, very typical for me to process with multiple tools to ensure that I'm getting the most complete interpretations from forensics tools. Of course, you go beyond that with your analysis, but it's absolutely pertinent to do that.
And why is it pertinent to use different tools, according to the Commonwealth's own digital expert?
So different forensics tools have different capabilities and look at data a little bit differently. So they each work and support different bits of data. So it's important to use multiple tools so you can see the results from different data sets and be able to compare those results and enhance those with manual analysis.
I mean, that makes sense, right? There's a ton of data on our phones. Different tools work with different data. So using multiple tools gives you more insight into how to actually interpret the data and do a manual analysis to come up with your own opinions or conclusions on how to read it all and what it means. Another digital expert for the Commonwealth, Ian Whiffen, testified in the last trial and has now offered a report for this trial as well. Now, Brennan says that Whiffen has proven that Green is wrong, and he states this as a matter of fact as opposed to a matter of opinion. But Whiffen himself, when testifying, clarifies that the artifact in question did show at 2:27, and he says that he disagrees with Green on what that means, but clearly says this is his opinion.
That is the time that is shown within the database. It was indeed a deleted record, but the interesting thing was why the timestamp said 2:27:40. And I did some testing on this and discovered the reason why 22740 was actually listed in the database, even though that's not the time, in my opinion, that the search was conducted.
He has also asked his, quote, opinions or conclusions, end quote, about Richard Green's affidavit.
It specified that Cellbrite report identified that the search was conducted at 22740. And as I've explained, I believe the tab took focus at 22740, not when the search occurred.
Interestingly, Whiffen also emailed Richard Green near the start of the trial to tell him that Cellbrite, the company that Whiffen works for, will be removing the artifact that shows the 227 search in the next version of the physical analyzer. Now, I've never personally heard of a prosecution expert emailing a defense expert before they testify. Maybe that's a common thing. It's not something I've ever heard of. And just looking at it from an outsider's perspective, it can appear like he's trying to get him to change his testimony or change his opinion. But that's not to say that that was Whiffen's intention. I think with as many things that have gone wrong in this case and been done that were so shady, I now just automatically start side-eyeing a lot of things that seem off to me now. We'll be right back after this. Regardless, Whiffen and Hyde, the Commonwealth's experts, both believe that the search for how long to die in the cold happened later, not at 227. They said that they did testing to come up with this conclusion, and they both think that the 227 timestamp has something to do with the tab, not the search. So they both explain why they think that, and then Green, the defense's expert, thinks differently. He thinks it happened at 227, and he explains why he thinks that. But the difference of opinion and conclusion isn't the only issue brought up during these arguments. So let's talk about hash values. I mentioned before that hash values are like the fingerprint of the data. Once you get the data, it has a hash value. Then if anything is damaged or changed or manipulated in any way, the hash value won't be the same. Now, the first thing that's done after getting the full extraction is verifying the hash value. The problem here is that Trooper Guarino got Karen's phone and did a full extraction with Cellbrite. That extraction would have the hash value on there. But he didn't turn that over to the defense.
When Mr. Guarino used the Cellbrite UFED reader, all he turned over in the beginning was the UFED reader report. He didn't turn over the data, the full. So Mr. Green had to ask for the data.
Alessi says sending the report but not the raw extraction is unprecedented, and Green put this in his affidavit.
Why is that unusual? Because what happens in every case, without exception, is that the law enforcement sends the raw image, original data that has the hash signature on it.
Then Guarino only provides a PDF with the hash value, but he uses Gray Key. Gray Key doesn't work when it comes to validating hash values. And Whiffen even says this in his report, which Alessi read out loud in court.
This requires authentication of the original hash value, which is not possible with Gray Key extractions, as the PDF containing the extraction hash value is unsigned.
So the defense still can't verify the hash, and they still don't have the full extraction. So Green goes back and requests it again, and this time he finally gets it. That's when the defense realizes that the validation wasn't done correctly.
It's not Mr. Green that is coming up out of thin air with these issues. This is the job of a data forensic person, and the first principle is to see whether the data is valid. So not only does Mr. Green justify in his affidavit why there's a big concern over this, Mr. Whiffen concedes it on page 3 of his report. And when there's an issue over hash value, every single digital forensic expert is going to raise concerns about the validity of the data. And Mr. Whiffen is one of them who did that.
So the hash value can't be verified, and that raises red flags for the defense. Now, given the Sallyport video and all the issues with the digital evidence in this case, I'd be concerned too. But Brendan doesn't see it that way. He says that the defense has now sprinted off into another universe.
He complains that he did not receive the PDF when he received the download. And because there was a production at different times, he then sprints out into a different universe and suggests that somehow it must be because there's manipulation. And again, doesn't prove it.
Brennan says that there are ways to prove if something had been manipulated.
There's actually ways that a real forensic examiner can look at the PDF, the gray key file, and the phone and determine whether manipulation occurred.
Brennan says a real forensic examiner can determine if something was manipulated. Here's his real forensic examiner in the first trial saying that it is possible to have something manipulated without being detected.
It's potentially possible, but would require a large amount of knowledge and skill to do in a way that can't be detected.
Whiffen says that manipulation of the data is possible, which is why it's important to verify the hash value. Of course, in his report, he also said that he was unable to verify the hash value. This is the problem that they're debating. Now, Brennan lists some programs that are available to use for verification.
There's a program called XMP and another one called Magic.
By the way, I looked these up. I tried to look up XMP and I tried to look up Magic. What I found was that XMP Magic is all one thing, one app. But what do I know? I'll leave that stuff to the experts. Another big issue that was discussed is the actual potential manipulation of the data. Now, Alessi explains why Green included that in his affidavit.
There were 4,056 searches on the phone of Miss McCabe. 4,056. There was one deletion out of 4,056, and guess which one it was? House Long to Die in the Cold. There are no odds that that can happen randomly, that one search out of 4,056 is deleted. So what does Mr. Green say? He says that strongly suggests one of two things. Either there was user interaction deletion, or there was post-imaging manipulation of the data.
So Green's affidavit says his opinion is that the 227 artifact was deleted by either deliberate user interaction or manual post-imaging manipulation of the data by some unknown individual. So Brennan has a big problem with this opinion. Let's start with the deliberate user interaction. Brennan sprints off into another universe and jumps from that phrase to this.
And think about the import of this baseless claim by Mr. Green. It is suggesting that a witness with no other evidence whatsoever was involved in a conspiracy to murder somebody. That's the implication that he wants the jury to be confused by. Otherwise, there'd be no other reason to make the suggestion. That is an extraordinarily harsh claim when you don't have any facts to back it up. In ways, it is a very dangerous affidavit to simply make assaultive comments that a user did something, purposely deleted a very important phrase, how long to die in the cold, without any forensic data or evaluation or validation.
Yeah, so that's not what the affidavit said. Green never accused Jen McCabe of anything. He's looking at data and he's giving his opinions on why things are the way they are. Which, by the way, is also exactly what the other experts do. They give their opinion on what they think it says and how things can be explained. So the other part of Green's opinion was manual post-imaging manipulation of the data by some unknown individual. And here's what Brennan says about that part.
The opinion number two the defense would like the jury to hear is that somebody somehow, whether it was a person, presumably the witness in this case, or the police somehow manipulated the phone. I dare say there's no evidence to support that. And yet, in an affidavit under oath to the court, in an attempt of advocacy, this witness is comfortable and willing to promote a claim that has no factual basis. If a witness, an expert, is going to promote in an affidavit a claim with no factual basis, we should not trust, without vetting that witness, that their other claims have any merit or value.
Brennan also takes a major issue with Green's affidavit, saying that the data could have been manipulated.
This expert, so-called expert, takes the liberty to say that the McCabe cell phone could have been manipulated. not that it was, not that I did a study, not that I have a fact, it could have been manipulated, then rehashed after manipulation with the PDF being modified. Wow. It's an extraordinary conspiracy in the world of forensic science to be able to accomplish all of those tasks. So if he has no basis in fact or methodology, no good faith basis to make this assertion, why is he?
So Brennan has a big issue with Green saying that the 227 search data could have been manipulated, but when it's time for Brennan to explain the 227 search, he also gives an answer of it could have been this.
Since these are local tab states, results from the artifact may contain an earlier date and time compared to the results in the Safari history artifact if iCloud Safari synchronization is enabled across multiple devices on one iCloud account. And so, by axiom itself, it makes clear that an artifact in a tab can reflect a time that is much earlier than the actual search.
And as a reminder, Jessica Hyde, the Commonwealth's expert, gave this answer for the 227 timestamp.
227 isn't necessarily when the tab was closed. That's in my report. I say that it's undetermined because there's a lot of things that can cause that timestamp to be there, including tab being moved, tab being minimized. I don't know exactly what caused the tab to get that particular entry.
So this goes toward the argument that these are all opinions on what could happen. The experts do their own testing and try to figure things out, and they give their opinions on what they found. Brennan says that making those suggestions about the data was not Green's job.
When we look at his affidavit, it is replete with accusations suggesting but never proving, never providing fact, that there was some type of manipulation or tampering with evidence. Now, this is not the role of a forensic examiner unless there is proof, in fact, that happened.
But, Alessi explains, Richard Green isn't accusing anyone of anything. He is doing his job.
He doesn't accuse individuals. He says user interaction or post-imaging. That is the job of a digital forensic person, to point that out and say that raises concern. The fact that there's only one deletion of a search out of 4,056, I think it's malpractice if a digital forensic examiner doesn't point that out.
We'll be right back after this. Brennan also has an issue with Richard Green's testimony that he called the technical support to question them about the two reports being different.
Instead of doing validation or testing, relying on Cellbrite, what Mr. Green has done in section number 13 of his affidavit is stepped aside from methodology, and instead he cites that he called Cellbrite technical service. Now, this is the forensic examiner who is supposed to go through the process, and yet he defers it to technical support of Cellbrite. Technical support of Cellbrite he relies on to say that this artifact where this search is stored is appropriate. And he remains standing on that foundation as why somehow there's some validation that this search occurred at 227.
So Alessi also addresses that. He says that Mr. Green made it clear that he used the tools and did the analysis himself. But at the time of trial, there were two different Cellbrite versions on the market at the same time. One that showed the search and one that didn't.
Mr. Green did what any good digital forensic person would do. He called up support and said, what's going on here? You got one that shows it, you got one that doesn't. But he did what the NIST standards, the National Institute of Standards, and that's attached to Mr. Green's affidavit, says that good digital examiners use multiple tools, and when they have questions or they see anomalies, you call up the program people. You talk to their technical support. That's not someone inexperienced and relying upon them. That is the proper methodology. So Mr. Green did that to corroborate and get explanation for what he found.
FYI, Jessica Hyde also mentioned NIST guidelines in her testimony during the first trial. So when Green called Celebrite and they told him that the 227 timestamp was reliable, Brennan said that Green relied on that, but then when Celebrite turned around and said it wasn't reliable, Green just wanted to ignore that part.
Mr. Green then denounces the very source that he relies on. And so on one hand, he's saying, I relied on technical assistance to Celebrite, but then when they told me what I didn't like, I can ignore that part.
Interestingly, Whiffen also talked in his testimony about relying on Celebrite reports as a source, but then ignoring other parts.
So essentially, ignoring the browser state timestamp is important because that is not a reliable timestamp to show when that URL was visited.
The exact things that Brennan argues against on the opposing side are the things that are being done and said on his side. So Brennan argued his case and then Alessi gave his responses. They were each given one more chance at a response or rebuttal, and Brennan said this.
There is no hashtag concern. And when the defense raises issues, postures, ideas, we never hear what the problem is. What is the hashtag done? Who manipulated it? And that is the MO. Blame anybody. Don't articulate who. Be like a ghost, evasive as possible, and then when it gets knocked down, just posit a new theory.
Obviously, it would be outside the scope of what a digital expert is capable of saying to name one specific person who manipulated data. Brennan originally claimed that Green accused Jen. Now he's saying that Green won't be specific about who, and he's angry about both. Brennan also claims that the defense is wrong in one of their assertions, and says that digital analysis should be left to the experts.
A little bit of knowledge of forensic data analysis can be dangerous.
And Alessi agrees.
The Commonwealth said a little knowledge is dangerous. I don't know what a hashtag is. I've never heard of what was just said as a hashtag. It's a hash value, and it's a very important concept to get right.
I'll be honest, that made me laugh when I was watching it live. And you can see Yannetti at the defense table trying to hold back a chuckle. Now, before wrapping up, Brennan also seemed to use this opportunity to take another dig at the defense and a dig at Lally and how he did things last time.
And so the defense, without having an opportunity from Mr. Green prior to trial, stand behind these statements under oath, would like him simply to come before the jury, make these salacious comments, and then leave it to the government to knock it down. And that might be a common approach, reviewing the transcripts of this case, but the Commonwealth does not intend to simply let evidence come in that's not qualified, that's not factually sound, and then go knock down glass houses. That is not the approach the government is going to take to this case. If Mr. Green is going to testify, he should have a report that is factually based with methodology supporting these claims, these narratives that he's proposing.
And when it's over, Judge Canoni says what we were all already thinking.
So it sounds a lot like it may just be a disagreement in opinions, but for the Commonwealth, I will look more closely at your methodology arguments that were made today.
So Brennan tries to make it out like this whole debunked opinion thing is a matter of fact. But it's a matter of opinion, and his own expert even said that. They use different tools because nobody has the source code for Apple phones. So you use tools to try to help interpret what the source codes mean, and you do analysis and test and all of these things, and then you come to an opinion. Now, Judge Canoni didn't take long to make her decision. She issued a ruling later that day saying that there was no need for a Daubert hearing. And look, I'm not trying to be Team Whiffen or Team Green here. I'm on Team Justice. And justice involves a fair trial. Brennan is trying to secure a conviction by preventing the defense from being able to present their case. That's dirty. He knows the law. He knows that this argument is BS. He knows that the argument about Dr. Russell was BS. He's wasting the court's time, his own time, the expert's time, and he's playing dirty. It doesn't matter if you agree with the opposing side's experts or not. What matters is that they are constitutionally allowed to present a defense, and it's up to the jury to decide what's believable, not opposing counsel. This is why I'm so frustrated. There are too many issues with this case and the people involved. The prosecutor is supposed to represent the people of the Commonwealth and is supposed to be just and fair. But is he? What he's doing here isn't fair, trying to prevent a defense. And the arguments that he makes are often incredibly hypocritical. Like this one, for example. Brennan said he thought it was troubling that Richard Green used an excerpt from something instead of introducing the entire thing.
What is troublesome about his affidavit in Section 14 is he attempts to use resource material to convince this court that rather than methodology, these summary statements are something that the court should rely on. And so what he does is he takes an excerpt, and so he's taking a piece of the manual. They don't introduce the manual. And he tries to use that to buttress that this search happened at 227.
So why is this hypocritical? Well, in the last hearing, Brennan did exactly this thing that he's saying that Green did. Brennan used resource material from my interview with Dr. Kinsey, and he did exactly what he's so troubled by now.
He takes an excerpt, and so he's taking a piece of the manual. They don't introduce the manual.
Brennan took an excerpt from my interview. So he took a piece of my interview. He didn't introduce the whole interview. And he told Dr. Russell that Dr. Kinsey gave the opinion that the abrasions didn't look like dog marks.
And he tries to use that to buttress that this search happened at 227.
And he uses that to buttress that these injuries were not from a dog. But what he didn't introduce is the rest of the interview, where Dr. Kinsey says this, for example.
I've never seen any kind of injury like that caused by tail ends. I just haven't seen it.
Or any of the other times that Dr. Kinsey said in that interview that the Commonwealth's theory about the taillight doesn't make sense. Brennan said that he's troubled by Richard Green using this excerpt and not introducing the entire manual. But yet he's not troubled by being so incredibly misleading, and he's not troubled by trying to prevent the defendant from having a defense, and he's not troubled by making legal arguments that he knows have no grounds. And the fact that he isn't troubled by those things should be troubling for all of us. There is no justice for John O'Keefe without a fair trial. So, what's next? The arguments over the ARCA experts will be heard February 6th, so I'll have that in the next week's episode. Now, I mentioned before that Brennan has filed a motion to potentially exclude the ARCA experts. Not because of qualifications, because they're probably the most qualified experts that you could get, but the ARCA experts were hired by the Department of Justice because of the federal investigation into this case. So that puts some restraints on what information and discovery that the defense and the Commonwealth are able to get from ARCA. Brennan said he wrote a TUI letter, which is a request for government information to be used in the legal proceeding, and he's basically saying if he isn't able to get the extra discovery that he wants, then he wants the ARCA experts excluded from testifying. We should also hear arguments about the defense's motion to have the Commonwealth pay them back their expert expenses, which will be really interesting because I'd love to know what deal was made before he traveled there. So I'll have all that and whatever else pops up next week. My name is Brandy Churchwell, creator of 13th Juror Podcast. If you're enjoying it, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and share this episode with your friends. For more information, photos, and episode guides, visit our website at 13thjurorpodcast.com.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds.
Recently, I asked Mint Mobile's legal team if big wireless companies are allowed to raise prices due to inflation. They said yes. And then when I asked if raising prices technically violates those onerous 2-year contracts, they said, "What the f*** are you talking about, you insane Hollywood ass?" So to recap, we're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month.
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.